take this away.
You can start.
Good afternoon. So we're presenting ethical guidelines for good practice in the healthcare professions as set by the HPCSA. So being registered as a healthcare professional with the HPCSA confers us the right and privilege to practice our profession. Correspondingly, practitioners have moral and ethical duties to others and society in keeping with the South African Constitution and the obligations imposed on healthcare practitioners by law. So today we are presenting basically the HPCSA guidelines, which is composed in this booklet 1 to 17. Just bear with us, it's quite a lengthy document of about 300 pages that we try to squeeze in as much as possible.
Can I just caution you not to squeeze too much and just focus on some key elements, keeping your time in mind? But I think you can go up to 3:30.
We can do that. Okay, so
make it 25 past. We have a few minutes for questions and comments.
Can I take this away? Okay, so first our booklet 1 is the general ethical guidelines for healthcare. Sorry, we're just trying to figure something out. Okay, ready now. So the first booklet on general ethic guidelines contains value-oriented principles and express the most honorable ideals to which members of the healthcare profession should subscribe in terms of their conduct. More specific ethical guidelines and rules are later derived. Okay, so this is the core ethical principles that all of us know from medical school. I'm just going to run over it quickly. So basically, respect for person, respect your patient, acknowledge their intrinsic worth, dignity, and value, best interest or well-being, the non-maleficent principle, so do no harm. Then the beneficent principle, so act in the best interest of the patient, to recognize the human rights, autonomy, so self-determination, or for patients to make their own informed choices. Then integrity, so core ethical values and to practice as a responsible healthcare professional, and then truthfulness as a basis of trust. Then confidentiality, we'll go into that later again. Compassion, so be sensitive to and empathize with your patient. Tolerance, to respect the rights of people to have different ethical beliefs. Justice, to act in an impartial, fair, and just manner. Professional competence and self-improvement, to continually endeavor the highest level of knowledge and skill, and then community, to contribute to the betterment of society. So ethical guidelines promote on us a duty. So healthcare practitioners fulfill different roles. Accordingly, they have different kinds of duties. Natural duties, moral obligations, institutional duties, and legal duties. But today we're focusing on the secondary duties, which is general but acquired duties of the healthcare practitioner as a professional. So I'm just going to go around in the circle. First, we're going to the duties of the patient. So duty to the patient is the patient's best interest or well-being, respect for the patient, informed consent, patient confidentiality, patient participation in their own healthcare, impartiality and justice, access to care, and potential conflicts of interest. Then duties to the colleagues and other healthcare practitioners is referrals to your colleagues and potential conflicts of interest and working with your colleagues. Then duties to the patients of other healthcare practitioners is to protect them from risks like report violations, report impaired colleagues. Then duties to themselves is knowledge and skills, maintaining professional practice. Then we're going to duties to the society and to the environment, which includes conservation of natural resources and disposal of healthcare waste. Then duties to the healthcare profession is reporting misconduct and access to appropriate healthcare. That was booklet 1. So now for booklet 2, contains all the ethical rules of conduct for practitioners registered under the Health Professions Act. So this is quite a lengthy list. I'm just going to go quickly over all of them, just fast. So interpretation and application, that basically means that failure by a practitioner to comply with any conduct determined in these rules. Then advertising and canvassing and toting. It means that everyone is allowed to advertise, provided that the advertisement is not unprofessional, untruthful, or deceptive. Then the naming of your practice means it must be your own name. And then we're going to, I missed information on personal stationery. That just includes the basic stationery letterheads, for example, name, profession, your registered category, speciality, and all of the details that need to be on your stationery. Then partnership and jurisdicted persons and sharing of rooms means that your partnerships and your sharing of rooms may only be with the people that are registered with the under the Act. Then we're going to professional confidentiality. We're going to get into that on its own booklet. Then retention of human organs means that the practitioner shall only use it for research, educational training, and prescribed purposes during an autopsy. Then signing of official documents is basically the notion that all official documents related to patient care should be signed. Certificates and reports is the same as that info above. You need to have it fully identify yourself on the reports and documents with all the relevant information. Then we're going to issuing of prescriptions. It just say that you prescribe always in terms of the Medicine Related Substances Act. Then professional appointments means a written contract and appointment of employment shall be made available to the council or in accordance with the council. Then defeating or obstructing the council or board of performance of its duties is a practitioner shall at all times cooperate and comply with the lawful instruction by the council. Then performance of professional acts, which is quite important. A practitioner shall perform, except in an emergency, only a professional act for which he or she is adequately educated, trained, and sufficiently experienced, and under proper conditions and appropriate surroundings. Then reporting of impaired, of unprofessional, illegal, unethical conduct is exactly that. And then research, development, and use of chemical, biological, and nuclear capabilities means that you need approval from the board concerned with the research, development, or use. Okay, so that was a quick overview of booklet 2. So now we're going to booklet 3, which is the National Patients' Rights Charter in conjunction with the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. So this includes health and safe environment, access to health care, choice of health services, participation in decision-making, knowledge of one's health insurance and medical aid scheme, treated by a named healthcare provider, confidentiality and privacy, refusal of treatment, continuity of care, informed consent, a second opinion, and complaints about health services. So with all the rights comes responsibility. So the responsibility to the patient is to take care of his or her own health, to care for and protect the environment, to respect the rights of other patients and healthcare providers, to utilize the healthcare system properly and not to abuse it, to know his or her local services and what they have to offer, to advise healthcare providers on his or her wishes with regard to his or her death, to comply with prescribed treatment and rehab procedures, to inquire about the related cost of treatment and rehab and arrange for payment, and to take care of health records in his or her position. Okay, now we're going to booklet 4. Booklet 4 is to seeking patients' informed consent, so the ethical considerations. So a successful relationship between a healthcare practitioner and a patient depends on mutual trust, which basically comes down to patient autonomy. So this booklet sets aside the principles of good practice, which all healthcare practitioners are expected to follow when seeking patients' informed consent to investigations, treatment, screening, and research. So for this, consent to investigation and treatment. So first, providing sufficient information. I'm quickly going to take a second on that. So this info needs to include the range of diagnostic procedures, treatment options, benefit, risk, cost, and consequences, the patient's right to refuse treatment, details of the diagnosis and prognosis, uncertainties about the diagnosis, options for treatment and management of the condition, the purpose of the proposed investigations and treatment, explanations of the likely benefits and probabilities, any side effects, the name of the doctor overall responsibly, if there will be students involved, if patients can change their minds, the right to seek a second opinion, and as well as the cost and charges which the patient might have to meet. Then responding to questions, you should always respond in a just manner. Then withholding information is not allowed. Presenting information to your patients, as we just discussed. Then who obtains consent? So consent needs to be obtained by the healthcare practitioner that's providing the treatment or undertaking the investigation, to explain everything to the patient. If it is delegated, it is needed so that that doctor or whoever is suitably educated, trained, and qualified, has sufficient knowledge of the proposed investigation and treatment, and understand the risks involved, and acts in the accordance of the guidance of this booklet. Then in emergencies, you need to provide medical treatment to anyone who needs it, provided that the treatment is limited to what is immediately necessary to save a life or to avoid significant deterioration. And then you need to tell the patient as soon as they are successfully recovered or enough to understand. Then establishing capacity to make decisions. And this is also a bit extensive, but we're going to run through it quickly. So assessing mental capacity, then fluctuating capacity. What's important there is that you always make key notes, whatever the situation is. Then mentally incapacitated patients. So for that, the National Health Act does make provisions. So first, the person authorized by the court, or in order of priority, the patient's spouse, partner, parent, grandparent, major child, brother or sister can give consent. Then children. So children is also a lengthy topic. We're just going to say, so any person over age 18 is an adult and can make informed decisions. Then a child who is 12 years of age is legally competent to consent to medical treatment. But that if the child is of sufficient maturity, so that is for the doctor to decide. If the child is not of sufficient maturity, you can just get a parent or guardian consent. Then, and then of course, all the other acts, so any female, if it is like for termination of pregnancy. Then what's important is no parent or guardian or caregiver of a child may refuse to assist the child or withhold consent by reason only of religion or other beliefs, unless that parent or guardian can show that there is a medically accepted alternative choice to the medical treatment of the surgical cooperation concerned. Then we're going to applying to the court. So applying to the court basically say that if you're in doubt about the patient's capacity to give consent, you can go to your senior, and from there on you can get legal advice to go to see if you need a court ruling. Then forms of consent, we all know that forms. Just what's important also is that there still needs to be acceptance of that form just before the procedure, even especially in the case of a third party. Then express consent, just say the patient can indicate the informed consent either orally or in writing, although writing is preferred. And if it's orally, very important to note the key elements in the discussion on patient records. Then implied consent is consent must at all times be expressed and not be implied. Then consent to testing and screening. For that, just a quick overview. So basically, it's just important to note that there might be consequences of the screening and testing, and that you need to tell your patient clearly, that explain the purpose of the screening or test, the likelihood of a positive or negative, and even a false positive or negative result, and then the uncertainties and the risk attached to the screening and testing process, any significant medical, social, or financial implications, and the follow-up plan, including availability of counseling. Okay, so my last one is the booklet 5, so confidentiality, protecting and providing information. And so this guidelines is when disclosures may be justified or provided in this following booklet. So patients' right to confidentiality is described by Rule 13 of the HPCSA ethical rules, and the practitioner may only divulge information regarding a patient only if it's done in terms of the statutory provision, at the instruction of the court, in the public's interest, with the express consent of the patient, and with the written consent of a parent and guardian of a minor under the age of 12, and in case of the deceased patients. Then retaining confidentiality comes down to the patient's right to expect that his information will be confident. Then protecting information, just to say that every personnel that you're responsible for needs to understand that the information needs to be effectively protected. And then just to note is that improper disclosures are most common are unintentional, like patients overhearing discussions or files or something lying around. Then disclosure of information to others providing the care. Your patient needs to understand that you're going to discuss the case with other healthcare doctors in the team to provide continuity of care. And then disclosure of information other than for treatment of individuals would include disclosures which benefit a patient indirectly, disclosures where the healthcare provider have dual responsibilities, disclosures to protect the patients or others, children and other patients who may lack competence to give consent, and disclosures after a patient's death. Then disclosure in connection with the judicial or statutory proceedings. We're going to discuss that again a little bit on later, as well as the electronic processing of information. Ellen is going to take us now from booklet 6 to 10.
Okay, so I'll be talking about the guidelines for management of HIV infection and AIDS. HIV has emerged as one of the most challenging healthcare matters of modern society. It has forced healthcare professionals to reconsider important values relating to human rights, stigma, and discrimination. So the responsibilities of us to HIV positive patients is agreement to treat all HIV patients. There should be never suboptimal care because of the risk to a healthcare professional, and unilateral decisions not to resuscitate solely on the status is unethical. Consent is always needed, continuous counseling pre and post test, and in the management of a patient, giving consideration to other medical practitioners about the patient's status who are also involved in the care of the patient must be done, and this must be with a consent. In terms of confidentiality, the SA Act of 108 of 1996 recognizes the importance of confidentiality of the HIV status. Testing for HIV and relaying the results to other parties involved, like family or friends, must be of complete confidentiality. HIV testing only takes place under voluntary and informed consent of the patient. Healthcare professionals must be aware of the reliability and safety of HIV kits available, such as the first response and ABON, which are your rapid tests, and an ELISA in the lab. The patient should be given enough information as to why the tests are done, what the advantages and disadvantages are for the patient, and the psychosocial aspect of a positive test. It's important, as the more information we give, the better the adherence is to the medication. And it's important to know that it's more important than diagnosis. The patient should be given enough knowledge of HIV status of patients in the healthcare environment. The healthcare practitioner must appreciate the window period and prevalence of HIV infections in the community. Healthcare establishments should ensure safety precautions for practitioners, such as PPE, gloves, visors for certain procedures, and a staff clinic if exposed. Where high-risk procedures are contemplated, informed consent must be taken before. And if the patient refuses, the patient should be managed as if he or she were positive. In terms of partner disclosure, you should always encourage positive patients to disclose their status to the sexual partners. If the patient refuses consent, the healthcare practitioner should use his or her discretion when deciding whether to divulge the information, looking at the risks versus the benefits, and afterwards always asking about interpersonal violence. So guidelines for withdrawing of treatment. It is important to consider any life-saving or life-prolonging treatment, which makes it possible to extend the lives of patients who may pass away. However, life has a natural end, and existence of such techniques of life support may sustain life artificially for many years for patients where there may be little recovery. These guidelines recognize the need to ensure that patients can die with dignity and that their families are appropriately involved in their care. Healthcare practitioners have a duty to give priority to patients based on clinical need while seeking to make best use of resources. So these are the procedures to follow. As per the National Health Act, it allows patients in writing to mandate a person to act on their behalf when they're no longer able to do so. The patients and their families, unless a contrary wish is expressed, must be kept informed of the treatment, treatment alternatives, and outcome probabilities. Patient must indicate their wishes regarding further treatment. All decisions should be fully and clearly documented in the notes, including reasons for the decisions. This is especially important in litigation. Clinical responsibility for decisions. A decision to withhold or withdraw life-prolonging treatment should be made only by the senior clinician in charge of the patient. If no previous assessment or the diagnosis are known, the healthcare practitioner should start treatment, which may offer some benefit to the patient until a clearer assessment can be made. And in terms of timing of discussion, it should be done when the patient is best able to understand the information, and it should be allowed, the patient should be allowed to change their decision when needed. So when making a decision for the patient, the senior clinician in charge must consult the patient's authorized representative, the healthcare team involved in managing the patient, so a multidisciplinary team, and any previous wishes of the patient in terms of wills and notes. Always aim to achieve consensus on what course of action would be in the best interest of the patient and should be in accordance with the HPCSA. So withholding resources due to scarcity of resources. Even if it is not in the best interest of the patient, it is permissible, especially if there's no critical care or chronic dialysis units. The institution has the right to limit life-sustaining interventions without the consent of a patient. We are, however, obliged to provide appropriate palliative care and follow-up. So the next booklet is on ethical guidelines for reproductive health. Reproductive health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. So we've all had to do an intimate exam, and these are the guidelines that are set. Sure, we should ensure that the examination is necessary, explain why and what the procedure will entail, get permission, ask for a chaperone, and always indicate in your notes who the chaperone is, and if refused by the patients, why. Give privacy to undress and dress, and give adequate draping and keep the discussion relevant. Contraception. The principle of beneficence requires that the methods must be safe, effective, and acceptable. By introducing these methods, it should be guided by the patient's decision, which encompasses autonomy. Contraception may be provided to any child over 12 without the consent of the parents. Thorough medical advice and proper examination must be done to ensure the best contraceptive device is given. Sterilization. Encourage that the patients to include their partners in the counseling process. As it says, the ability to procreate affects the life of others. The physician's personal value should not limit the service. When looking at risks and resources, a hysterectomy for the sole purpose of sterilization is inappropriate. No minimum or maximum children should be used as a criteria to access to sterilization, and practitioners may refuse to participate in a sterilization procedure provided it's a non-emergency. So termination of pregnancy for non-medical reasons. Termination of pregnancy is ethically justified when it is for a medical reason to protect the mother's health. For non-medical reasons, education, counseling, and services on family planning should be done, and abortion should never be used as a method for family planning. Practitioners are obliged to refer the woman to a colleague who's not the principal opposed to an abortion. A female child of any age is legally competent to consent to a termination of pregnancy, provided she has the necessary mental capacity to give an informed consent. So one of the topics was the surrogate motherhood. Surrogacy can be applied only in cases of a very limited special indication. So this is when there's an inability to fall pregnant, and it must be diagnosed by a gynecologist. And they say the condition should be permanent and irreversible. And it goes on to even say there should be a genetic link. In South Africa, the protection of the surrogate mother should be applied due to exploitation of a socioeconomic status. And in South Africa, the surrogates do not get paid for it. All surrogacy agreements must be approved by the High Court. Guidelines on keeping patient records. And this is any relevant record made by a healthcare practitioner at the time of consultation, handwritten notes, referral letters, lab reports, research form, and death certificates. Why must they be retained? To further the management of patients, clinical audits, promoting teaching and research, evidence and litigation, and accreditation. So these are the guidelines that follow for any consults. Only important thing that they do mention is that it's so important to write a signature with your name and position. And also dates to referrals to a specialist should also be indicated in the notes. Issuing of prescriptions shall be permitted when it's typewritten, computer generated, pre-typed or pre-printed with the signature done on that day. So last booklet would be guidelines for good practice in telemedicine. The telemedicine system is to deliver healthcare services at a distance to South African communities in underserved areas. This is by using electronic communications between a healthcare practitioner in one location and a healthcare practitioner in another location for the purpose of enhancing clinical, educational, scientific healthcare, particularly to underserviced areas. South Africa, we commonly use it for specialist and emergency care. So the ethical guidelines, you need to be registered to practice this method, deemed competent, the same standards of medical practice as conducting face-to-face consultations. And if you're going to practice outside SA borders, you need to be registered with the healthcare HPCSA. The healthcare practitioner and patient relationship. So the practitioner must agree to treat the patient, and the patient obviously must agree to be treated. There must be a mutual trust and respect. And since information is moved electronically, it should not alter the ethical duties of a healthcare professional. So the primary responsibility. So the consulting practitioner, the one seeking help, remains responsible for the treatment, decision, and other recommendations given to the patient. And the servicing practitioner must keep detailed records of the advice he or she delivers. Professional duties. Always act in the best interest of the patient, respecting patient's privacy and dignity, and giving patients the information that they need about their condition, and maintaining confidentiality. Always obtain informed consent in writing, and the consulting and servicing healthcare practitioner should always verify the location of where they are, identify themselves and their qualifications, and identify the patient. For informed consent in telemedicine, these are quite important. They said you should have the patient's name, location, physical address, the healthcare professional's qualifications, number, and location, explanation of telemedicine, types of transmissions consented to using these technologies. So prescriptions, refills, patient education, and security measures. So the three central factors: privacy, who can access it; authenticity, who sends the information; and integrity. Has the info been altered during the transmission? Then risks, benefits, and alternatives to telemedicine, and of course, the patient agreement.
All right, so I'll be going through the guidelines on over-servicing, perverse incentives, and related matters. So the following acts are not permissible for any healthcare practitioner. Number one, to provide a service, perform, or refer for a certain procedure to be performed on a patient that are neither indicated or scientific, or has been shown to be inappropriate. Over-servicing by ordering more tests, procedures, or care than is strictly necessary, which today is a common problem in modern medicine. Healthcare practitioners shall not manufacture for commercial purposes or trade a medical device or a scheduled substance, except where such a device has been granted by the HPCSA. Healthcare practitioners shall not endorse the use of any health establishment, medicine, or related service in a manner that unfairly promotes the practice or for the purpose of financial gain. Healthcare practitioners may only refer their patients to any healthcare establishment in which such a healthcare practitioner has a financial interest or a conflict of interest if it has been approved by the HPCSA. Healthcare practitioners shall only use technological equipment if it forms part of the scope of their practice, or if they have received appropriate training in the use of such equipment. All right, so in terms of financial incentives, a practitioner may have a direct or an indirect financial interest in a hospital or another institution, provided that such interests or shares are purchased at market-related prices. Such practitioner does not engage in or advocate the preferential use of such a healthcare institution. Such a practitioner annually submits a report to the council indicating the number of patients referred by him or her to such a healthcare institution, and also a number of patients that they have referred to hospitals that they do hold no shares in. Healthcare practitioners shall not enter into lease agreements with health establishments to rent their consulting rooms at rates conditional on the healthcare provider achieving a certain turnover. Healthcare practitioners shall not receive or pay commission or render any financial gain to any person for recommending patients. Healthcare practitioners shall not charge a fee for seeing medical reps. A practitioner shall not charge a fee or fees for services not rendered. In other words, if the patient doesn't honor the appointment, the patient doesn't have to be charged. Healthcare practitioners shall not share fees with any person or healthcare professional who has not taken a part in the service for which the fees were charged. Healthcare practitioners employed in the public service shall place their undivided attention to the disposal of the public service as employer. Practitioners engaging in remunerative work outside public service shall do so in line with the approval of the executive authority. So then in terms of guidelines for the management of healthcare, so the following is just what is considered to be healthcare waste. And I'm sure we all are aware of most of what is considered to be healthcare waste. I'm not going to go through that. All right, it is the responsibility of all healthcare practitioners to have a healthcare waste management system in place. Such a system should be provided by an accredited waste service provider and be conducted in accordance with the relevant SANS code. So I'm sure in Gauteng, we've all seen the Boothler Waste Company trucks. Independent practitioners should be able to provide demonstrable evidence of compliance with an acceptable protocol for the management of healthcare waste. Where a healthcare practitioner is in the employ of a healthcare institution and is not directly responsible for the management policies of the facility, there is an obligation of the practitioner to insist that the management comply with these guidelines. When using sharps containers for discarding needles and other sharp healthcare waste, healthcare practitioners should ensure that the containers are not filled beyond their capacity. Healthcare practitioners have an obligation to report evidence of unsafe disposal or management of healthcare waste by other persons to the HPCSA. All right, here's just a table indicating the color coding of the containers for the healthcare waste. So if it's anatomical waste and it's considered to be infectious, it is then red or orange. If it's infectious but non-anatomical, it's yellow. As well as with sharps containers, it has to be yellow and it has to indicate that it is a sharp. And then in terms of radioactive waste and cytotoxic waste, there has to be the hazard symbol on the container itself. Anything else is considered to be general waste, so black or dark green and sometimes purple as well. All right, here's just a diagram showing the responsibilities of each department to have a waste management team and then to provide to the waste management provider. All right, then in terms of ethical guidelines for researchers, so the following guidelines are applicable to all healthcare practitioners. So researchers conducting health research involving human participants need to consider the possible adverse implications of the research on vulnerable groups and thus have a duty to observe the highest possible standards to protect the rights of research participants. All health research proposals and protocols require approval by an accredited ethics committee before the research may commence, as stated in the National Healthcare Act of 2003. All right, then in terms of, so yeah, in health research, the common basic ethical principles apply. So that's non-maleficence, beneficence, autonomy, confidentiality, and justice. Just specifically with justice, justice imposes an ethical obligation to treat each person in accordance with what is right and proper. In research, this is primarily distributive justice, whereby there should be an equitable distribution of both burdens and benefits of research participation. It is an ethical imperative that the study should leave the participant or community better off or at least no worse off. And then in terms of the social value of research, so the following factors should be taken into consideration: the burden of disease, the cost effectiveness of interventions aimed at reducing the burden of disease, the availability of human and institutional resources for the implementation of an intervention at the level closest to the affected communities, the health needs of vulnerable groups such as women, older persons, children, and people with disabilities, and then the healthcare needs of communities. So in terms of respect for research participants, so health researchers should always place the life, well-being, health, privacy, and dignity of their participants before all other interests. Be accessible to research participants in the course of the investigations. Ensure that their personal beliefs do not influence their choice of the research participants. Such beliefs may prejudice choices regarding lifestyle, culture, belief, etc. Ensure that research participants are compensated for all reasonable expenses or loss of income incurred as a result of their participation in the research. All right, then in terms of informed consent, this is just what we went through already. So with research, the patients or the participants need to have sufficient information. The information needs to be given to them in a manner that they understand, especially when you look at illiterate or uneducated patients. Obtain consent of legally authorized representatives in cases of research participation who cannot consent for themselves, ergo like children, mentally challenged, elderly, and the unconscious. Inform research participants of their right to abstain from participating. In other words, they can revoke their consent at any time during the research. Then obviously the proper documentation needs to be there when you're doing research, and then to recognize the right of research participants to expect that health research will not pass on any personal or confidential information. All right, then just reporting scientific misconduct. So healthcare researchers should report evidence of fraud and other crimes or scientific misconduct to the HPCSA. This is defined as anything from fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and etc. You can see the link there if you need more information. All right, and then lastly, so research development and the use of chemical and biological weapons. The development of chemical and biological weapons is a major threat to global security and to the safety and health of the world's peoples. A number of countries around the world have continued to pursue scientific programs to develop such capabilities despite international efforts to control the proliferation of these weapons of mass destruction. Healthcare practitioners are committed to the preservation of life and the alleviation of human suffering. It is completely contrary to the fundamental principles of the ethics of the health profession for healthcare practitioners to participate in research activities directed at generating materials intended to cause harm to human wealth and well-being. So the following principle, as stated by the Declaration of Geneva, should always be kept in mind. I will maintain the utmost respect for human life from its beginning, even under threat, and I will not use my medical knowledge contrary to the laws of humanity. All right, and this is just our references, and yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Is that over there? All of the books covered, all of the booklets. Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's useful. The idea was to give you a sort of overall view on the ethical guidelines, so that you can know what's not, sometimes it's hard to read all of them, so you know what is in them and reference some of them. Great. Please keep an eye out for them. They change and they're updated, just like the telemedicine was just recently. So please watch out for these and keep abreast. Thank you, guys, for the overview. I've got the guidelines, the presentation, so we'll put it out on the website. Any questions? Any comments? Okay. If there are none, what we'll do is go to the next group. I think that's the last one, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, Prof.
Kishan. All right.
It's not the last presentation. We also have to present, yeah.
All right. I think I thought we had only 4. That's fine. If we can just keep